So hello and welcome to Prevent Connect Campus, Partners in Prevention, Connecting Sexual Violence Prevention and LGBTQ-Inclusive Campus Culture. I am Ashley Klein from Prevent Connect. Prevent Connect is a national program of the California Coalition Against Sexual Assault, sponsored by the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. The views and information provided in this web conference do not necessarily represent the official views of the U.S. government, CDC, or CalCASA. We have some learning objectives today, and so we hope that by the end of this session you will be able to describe the shared risk factors for perpetration of sexual violence and bias incidents against queer and gender nonconforming folks, and what these look like on college campuses. We hope you'll be able to identify opportunities to create SV prevention programs that are both broadly inclusive of all gender and sexual identities and speak specifically to the experiences of members from the LGBTQ community. And then we hope that you'll be able to evaluate opportunities for staff of LGBTQ centers and sexual violence prevention and response offices on campuses to collaborate on policies and programs. So I would love to do an audience poll to see where we are in terms of the work that you all are involved in on campus. So let me give you that option. So if you would answer and let us know if you're A, primarily doing work, LGBTQ work, if you're primarily doing violence prevention and response work, or maybe something else. It looks like the majority of you are doing mostly primarily violence prevention and response work. Yeah, that's what it looks like. People keep changing their answers or still answering. So it looks like about 75% of our audience today is doing primarily violence prevention and response work. So thank you for that. We'll go ahead and share that so you can see it. And then I'm going to withdraw it. All right. So just a quick note on pronouns. A lot of times you'll hear people say, oh, what are your preferred pronouns? And so just a quick note, when you say preferred, that kind of insinuates that it's up for debate, right? No, it's not a preference. These are my pronouns. And then, well, pronouns imply something about gender. They don't declare someone's gender identity. So you can't know everything about someone's gender identity just based on the pronouns that they may use. If you would let us know what pronouns you go by in the text chat box, we would love that. I personally go by she, her, and hers. But if you would let us know, it looks like Vanessa, she, her, and hers. I'm seeing a lot of she, her, and hers so far. I see someone says, or use my first name, so that's a great way to just use someone's name as an identifier. He, his, and him, they, them, Jen says. So thank you all for letting us know. Them, their, she, her, and hers, from Marie. Thank you all so much for participating. So before I hand it over to our wonderful facilitators today, I just want to say that one of the things that we've been highlighting with Prevent Connect Campus is that prevention really needs to be intentional, strategic, and comprehensive. And so we've been doing web conferences on different topics incorporating this framework because it's really important that we're thoughtful about our prevention efforts. And so part of this thoughtfulness includes being sure that our prevention efforts are reflective of the diversity of our campuses and also that we're encompassing the experience of all students on campus. And so in regards to LGBTQ students, we know that these students are experiencing sexual violence at higher rates, yet a lot of the ways that we talk about prevention can still be very heteronormative, and experiences of LGBTQ students aren't always represented or included in our prevention efforts. So I want to say that this isn't unique to campuses either. It's really reflective of the general field of sexual violence prevention. And in fact, Prevent Connect has recently produced 2 web conferences on this topic, about moving beyond binaries and heteronormative approaches in our prevention efforts. And you can view those on our website. I'll give you a link. And while that was a really great conversation, I'm really excited today to hear from our facilitators about what those conversations look like on a college campus and also what the unique opportunities are in terms of working in partnership with LGBTQ centers and sexual violence prevention programs. So now I would love to introduce you to our facilitators. Meg Justin is the Director of Sexual Assault Prevention and Response at Williams College. Hi Meg, how are you today?
Hello, I'm great, Ashley. Hi, everybody.
And then our other facilitator today is Justin Adkins. And Justin is the Assistant Director of Gender, Sexuality, and Activism, which I think is the coolest title ever, at the Davis Center at Williams College. Justin, how are you today?
I'm doing very well, thank you.
Excellent. So I am going to go ahead and hand the podium over to you both.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So we just wanted to make a quick note about our language use today. We're not going to do an LGBTQ 101. There are a lot of really excellent trainings and webinars and lots of stuff actually even that you can find through Prevent Connect if you want more information. But I did want to make a note about the language we're going to use today and how we're going to use it. So one thing that we'll be talking about, one term we'll be using is cisgender, or sometimes people shorten it and say cis. And essentially what that means is people whose gender identity matches the sex that they were assigned at birth. And we're also going to be using the word queer a lot. And for us today, that means to include people whose gender identities are trans and non-binary and sexual identities that are not straight. And why are we doing that, Justin?
So it's really important because sexual identities of our students are increasingly visible and increasingly fluid. In a 2015 climate survey that we did here at Williams College, we found out that 15 of our respondents identified as non-heterosexual and 1% identified as trans non-binary. I've been working here at Williams College doing LGBT work for 8 years now, and the group of non-binary students keeps increasing. And there was a survey done by Fusion just recently. There's a great article online. If you just search for like Fusion, millennials not identifying as straight, something along those lines in Google, you can find it. And their survey showed that 50% of young people between the ages of 18 and 24, I believe, think that gender is a spectrum, and some people fall outside of the conventional categories of man and woman. And this is a massive shift that we've been seeing just in the past few years. And it's really important to keep in mind about the fluidity of our students' identities when we're working with them in all capacities at a college or university.
So there's some pieces that we want to talk about in terms of how our work connects. So my work and my background are primarily in violence prevention and response. Justin's work is in working in LGBTQ settings and working with cross-cultural and diversity issues generally. So certainly there are several ways that we see our work as connecting. This is from a 2012 NSBRC report, and we obviously know that sexual assault and rape are happening within same-gender, same-sex relationships, but we also know that LGBTQ folks are exposed to sexual assault and rape as a bias-motivated or an anti-LGBTQ hate crime. And so we're sort of dealing with sexual violence against LGBTQ folks in a dual way. And it's a way that's important, actually, because I was just thinking through as Ashley was talking about upcoming work on consent, and there's so much powerful work going on in prevention circles around consent. And I think thinking about bias-related incidents against LGBTQ people, there's a piece around that consent doesn't really get to and doesn't really address. So understanding that we're holding to really important things here.
And I also think it's really important to think about our students before they get to college and colleges and universities, that a lot of times sexual assault or rape is used as a weapon against people who identify as LGBTQ as children. And we often, I find that a lot of times we don't talk about that at the higher education level of higher education, but it's really important to kind of keep that in our minds as we're working with students. They may have encountered violence that was used as a weapon against them for being queer, and they're figuring out how to deal with that once they get to college.
So we're going to talk now about some of those shared risk factors. folks may remember, if you've been a part of the Prevent Connect community for a few years now, the study came out, Dorothy Espelage and Kathleen Basile, looking at the links between homophobic teasing and sexual harassment and sexual violence. And it's a great study. It was around the time that many states were passing anti-bullying legislation, including our state of Massachusetts. And the key piece of this is that Espelage and her co-researchers are saying, we suspect that according to the bully sexual violence pathway, as adolescents who perpetrate traditional bullying mature, they increase their use of homophobic epithets. We hypothesize that as these bullies engage in more interactions with opposite gender peers, they are more likely to perpetrate sexual violence. So this needs more fleshing out, but what these researchers were finding is a link, in fact, between early adolescent homophobic bullying and later perpetration of sexual violence, so that the folks who are engaging in behaviors sort of across their adolescent lifespan are impacting both survivors of sexual violence and LGBTQ folks and the overlap of those people within this Venn diagram. So that's something, truly shared risk factors, that we're trying to look at here as well. Another piece of research, and this is, I'm going to kind of do a really quick overview of Neil Malamuth's confluence model, which some folks might be familiar with. So essentially what this model, which has good replication support, hypothesizes is that sexual aggression is the confluence, the coming together of two kind of pathway risk factors. So one of those is around impersonal sex, and I'm not going to talk that much about that, except to say that impersonal sex is a way in which people's identities, and particularly men's masculinity, is reinforced by the way that they have sex and sort of the content of their sexual relationships. And then the other piece of this is a question of hostile masculinity. And so the hostile masculinity piece is characterized by having really specific beliefs about gender binary. So it's that for these folks, it's not a spectrum. There are men and there are women, and that they relate to each other in really adversarial ways that, particularly for men who hold hostile masculinity beliefs, beliefs that women's communication can't be trusted, that it's essentially kind of an adversarial game-playing relationship. So there are some things around this that create some really interesting correlations for our work. Casey et al. In 2014, in their conference paper, we were taking a look at exploring Malamuth's confluence model, and essentially found that in their research, hostile domineering attitudes towards women were a more powerful driver of sexual aggression than an impersonal or non-intimacy-based approach to sexuality, suggesting that universal prevention efforts aimed at shifting gendered attitudes and an endorsement of hostile masculinity may be more effective than addressing sexual behavior itself. So we essentially find ourselves in a place where there are shared risk factors for both perpetration of sexual violence on campus and an environment that is deeply queer-phobic to our students on campus.
And we're seeing a lot of that, in the news right now, especially around new laws in North Carolina and other places, where we're seeing a hatred of trans people and also queer people in general, especially masculine women and feminine men or trans people on any part of the transgender spectrum. And a lot of that is fear around masculinity and violence associated with masculinity. So we're seeing some of those connections playing out in other circles as well.
And so, Ashley, I think we're ready for a text chat question. Should we go ahead and do that?
Wonderful. Yeah, let's go to that slide. So we want to hear from you all about how do you see these risk factors manifesting on your campus. So Meg, Justin, maybe there are some things that you both have seen at the campuses that you've been on.
I think a lot of times some of the stuff that we've been seeing over the years are that students who are saying things like they don't want to use somebody's chosen pronouns are also sometimes the same students who we then end up seeing who have violated somebody's personal space, who have been involved in exploitation, stalking, and other sexual violence on campus. And that's one example. I think we're also, the comments that come up about homophobia and calling people by homophobic slurs. A lot of times those are the same students that we see who are being violent against women, cisgendered women, as well as queer people. So we see those links pretty directly, those issues very directly correlated.
So I see in the text chat Jen Brockman mentioning hypersexualized themes for parties, and definitely that's something we've seen on our campus as well. Not just hypersexualized themes, but deeply binary themes, and also often those have not just deeply gendered, but racial and class undertones that are deeply problematic as well. So absolutely.
And there are a lot of comments here in the chat about athletics and about men in athletics. And one of the things that we've realized is that by working really as closely as we can with the coaches, that the tone that coaches set and team captains set is really important. And when we have team captains who have some hostile masculinity issues, that we're seeing that those teams, the rest of the team copies those patterns. So if we're able to address things at the captain and coach level and show different ways of being masculine, that you can be a really great football player and that you can still not join into the binary aspect and hostile masculinity.
Yeah, and I'm seeing some comments about, I think it was Kathleen that said they have, like, well, I think the term was pockets of toxic masculinity. And Kathleen, on her campus, it sounds like it's in fraternities, but I think definitely those kind of pockets of toxic masculinity can show up in different areas on campus. I think Hugh in Australia said the same thing. They've been seeing a rise of that.
Yeah, and I think, one of the things that we have a lot of conversation, we have we're a Division III school, so let me be clear about the level at which our students are playing athletics, but, one of the things that we've had a lot of conversation about is because we have a lot of students involved in athletics, concern about, is athletics itself a driver of perpetration? And I think that's like a whole other webinar, but one of the conversations that we have had is that it's not, there's nothing about athletics in and of itself. There's no sort of significant difference between contact and non-contact sports in terms of levels of perpetration nationally, but that certain types of sports are more likely to support particular types of hostile masculinity. And the important thing, that we've been trying to address on our campus is that certainly does exist, and we're used to that being normalized within an athletic context. And I'll say also, we do not have a Greek system on campus. But that can just as easily happen we have a couple of academic departments that are very heavily gender skewed and can also contribute to the same kinds of behavior. So helping our campus understand that the problem is the hostile masculinity, not just the athletics piece in and of itself.
And we'll be talking a bit more about that as we go on in the webinar. I'm going to talk about some of the programming that we've done here, and one of the programs that I get really excited about is LGBT work with our athletes.
Absolutely.
We'll get to that in a minute. Cool.
Yeah, I think Marianne had a question. She said, what do you do when students are attempting to create sex-positive and or inclusive spaces only to have these co-opted by a more hostile masculinity? And an example was that it sounds like they tried to create a space for folks to kind of explore their gender identity, and that was co-opted to the slogan, guys wear a dress, girls wear less.
When I started working at Williams, we were, as a school even, especially regionally, we were pretty infamous for a party called Queer Bash. And Queer Bash was a party that the Queer Student Union threw every year, every fall. And it was one of the biggest parties on campus. And when I first started working here, it was predominantly LGBT students who ran the party. Everybody was more or less respectful. And over time, though, that party became something where it was almost even a hazing for first-year students. So our RAs were encouraging There are first-year students to attend even if they didn't want to. People are encouraged to wear as little as they possibly could. And I realized one year I was staffing the party, and it was in a space where I could kind of stand up on the second floor and look down to the general party atmosphere. And I looked around, and there were barely any of my LGBT-identified students were there anymore. And it was like early on in the evening. And I worked with the Queer Student Union to actually change that party. So now it's called Night Out. And just even, it's the same party framework, but just by changing the name, we kind of got away from something that was becoming really toxic. And it took a lot of work with my LGBT students because they were so tied to having the best party on campus. And part of them didn't want to have a smaller party, but then we also were seeing more sexual violence reported during those nights. So we had more trips to the hospital because of alcohol poisoning and more reports the week after about violence that occurred at that party. And when my LGBT students found that out, we started a huge shift in the programming that we did. I'm also really hesitant to have any kind of drag performances on campus, especially if it ends up as a drag performance that might be seen as mocking trans people or women, which often things can kind of, dive into that kind of an atmosphere. So we have a lot of conversations about how some of those things are awesome in other places. Going to a bar and watching a drag performance is amazing and is a great experience for many people, but doing that on campus doesn't usually end up having the same outcomes that we would hope for.
So we're going to use a framework today to talk about opportunities for connection, and we're going to talk about that at 3 levels. So the first overarching level is policy. And so policy is something that impacts all of the students or all of the people in your institution, followed by programming, so what you do to support that policy, to bring education to the campus, to involve people, and then practice are the ways that you implement things, how people are trained, how people talk to folks, what your staff does, things like that.
And the practice part for us is the things that we do. That's the programs that we do, our 2 offices do jointly together, or the programs that come out of one of our offices that influence the other office. And so we'll discuss the real practicality of the practice here in a few minutes.
Great. So let's talk about the starting point of policy. So we have a couple of different policy-making entities around sexual violence response and prevention. One key role about policymaking is that all stakeholders really need to be involved in policymaking. And so that means, especially when you're considering response or prevention policies, making sure that it's not just your sexual assault folks who are at the table or your violence prevention folks who are at the table, but also that your LGBTQ or multicultural center people are there. So we do a lot of policy making and advising through a group on our campus called SAPA, the Sexual Assault Prevention and Awareness Working Group. And there are some groups, it's a staff student committee, and our peer rape and sexual assault network are involved. Our Men for Consent group is involved. But in addition, we have our Student Athlete Advisory Council, our college student government, the group responsible for all campus entertainment, and our Feminist Active, our Queer Student Union, and the umbrella group who represents our minority groups. So making sure that we have all of our stakeholders really at the table. And then Justin uses a different policymaking format.
So I have a group called the LGBTQ Advisory Roundtable, and it's a group predominantly actually of faculty and staff members, and then we invite some students every year to participate. And they help advise me, and we actually look specifically at like 1 or 2 policies or 1 or 2 areas each year. So we've been focusing a lot in the past 2 years on really kind of tidying up some of the edges around our trans inclusion policies across campus. And that includes things like what are we doing in athletics to make sure that trans students are aware that they're welcome to participate at all levels of athletics. And these things tie in together because as we reduce some of the barriers for LGBT students to participate in athletics or to use a bathroom that's safe for them, et cetera, we're also breaking down some of that hostile masculinity that we were talking about that we see influence sexual violence.
And the next piece that we wanted to move to, and I see folks talking in the text chat about traditions, and so I think let's we'll put a pin in that because I think that that's coming up a lot, and I see people identifying with that in the text chat. So just to say that we see it, we acknowledge it, and we'll circle back to it. So a piece around policy language. One of the things that we have done is go through not just our sexual misconduct, dating violence, and stalking policies, but all of our policy language around conduct or residential policies, and even our communication with parents to say that we are using gender and sexuality inclusive, or gender and sexual identity inclusive language. So everywhere we're using they pronouns, not she/he. And there's two reasons for that. First is making sure that we are broadly inclusive of gender, so not simply binary in gender, but also that I think that there's also a way in which she/he is used as a slur against trans people, and so making sure that we're not replicating that in our policies.
And we've done that not just, Meg mentioned that not just at the sexual violence and consent policy level, but we're doing that across campus. We're also trying to use to eliminate the use of Mr. and Ms. And just the way our campus is in general, we refer to people on campus by their first name most of the time anyway. So even in our hiring practices, almost all of our letters don't specify somebody's pronouns or gender identity unless we know their what they use.
The next piece that we did was to go through a review of our implementation to make sure that when we implemented, especially our sexual misconduct, dating violence, stalking policies, that people were having equitable experiences of those processes and of those policies. So talking to staff in support and advising roles or who serve in adjudication roles to make sure that they are trained on LGBTQ competency issues. And the reason for that is twofold. So the first is to make sure that anyone, whether those folks are in our health center, whether they're in student life, whether they are investigators or hearing sexual misconduct cases, we did not want is for LGBTQ students to be reporting experiences of violence and have to educate the people helping them or deciding about their case in understanding what queer life meant. And so not having someone say, oh, well, how is it that queer people have sex? And so in what way would this be sexual violence or rape? That is not the responsibility of students to educate people in that space. And another piece is around implicit bias. And do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so there's this great book called Whistling Vivaldi. And Whistling Vivaldi by Claude Steele is mostly talking about stereotypes in regards to race, and it's mostly focusing on K through 12. But the thing that we've done a lot of reading groups on campus of faculty and staff members on using this book, and what the book talks about is he talks about how if you walk into a classroom, so let's say you're a cis woman and you walk into a science classroom and you're one of the only women in the class, that just the fact of being one of the only women in the class, you automatically might feel less than, and it's because of the way that we're socialized. So we're socialized to think that women don't do science, for example, which we all know is not true. But also then he talks about if you ask specific questions, so if you ask people to put their race or their gender at the beginning of a test, that if it's that science classroom, if you ask women to identify their gender, even if it's binary gender, and people, when you put women down, that then automatically they were doing less well on the exam, and if they took that question off, and you weren't asked to put your gender at the beginning of the test, even if you were asked to put it at the end of the test, then those students were doing much better on that exam. So this is really important stuff to think about, and it's multi-layered, as you can see even from the cover of the book here, where it says all these different identities on the cover of this book. It's all these multi-layers. When students come and talk to us, the language that we use is really important, and the level of knowledge that we have about multiple identities and the way that identities intersect is really important as we're talking to our students.
And related to that, the other book recommendation that we wanted to make that really contributes to this conversation is brand newly published in the last couple of weeks, Queering Sexual Violence, Radical Voices from Within the Anti-Violence Movement, which is an incredible anthology of pieces edited by Jennifer Patterson, and just engages a lot of really fascinating conversations about the ways in which we can understand sexual violence through a queer critical lens. So some of the examples are, in talking about how do we talk about people who, following sexual violence, identify as queer. And sort of often that is talked about as the reason behind their queerness, or that is sort of a tragedy that they were kind of lost from the straight community. And that's a way of minimizing both their identity as a queer person, but also kind of not valuing queer identity in general, even at the same time as we're trying to respond to violence. So just absolutely really incredible essays, and if your library is able to purchase this or you want it for your personal library, this is a really incredible book.
Megan, if I could just say, first of all, thank you to both of you for these two recommendations. I had the opportunity to read Queering Sexual Violence in the last week or so, and Prevent Connect will actually be doing a podcast with Jennifer Patterson, so be on the lookout for that. But I'm wondering too, for our audience, if you all have any recommendations for resources, please let us know in the text chat, because I'm sure that there's stuff that you've used in doing this work, and we would love to see that.
Yeah, please do, because some of I think the best, both of us would say that some of the best resources we have found have been recommendations from other people. So if you have those, please share those in the text chat. So we're going to talk also now about programming and what it is that we're doing with programming. Do you want to do that?
So first thing is that programming to us is starting points, not stopping points. So knowing that queer people exist or that there are queer survivors is not just, that's like the beginning of what we have to do. We also then have to figure out how to best incorporate identity into all the work that we do. And that's in our advertising, that's in our committees, because we all love a good committee. So how do you make sure that LGBTQ people are involved in that committee? And it's not just like tokenized involvement, but really focusing on how all of our identities intersect is really important.
One thing we wanted to address were two things, actually. So one is the opportunity to have closed spaces on campus. So places where people it can be a closed space for people who share a particular identity. One way that we have approached that, I think both of us believe really strongly in the need for and potential of closed spaces, and building skills to reach across those spaces and discuss across difference. So we are looking for opportunities to do both those things. If we're going to close a space to someone, so for example, saying that this workshop or this group or this discussion is for people who identify as women, that happens in the advertising place, so that no one shows up there and then is told at the moment that the space is closed and that they have to make a decision. So we're always very clear in our advertising about that, and in saying that it's for people who identify as women, that it is not for other folks to sort of police that identity, that we're not asking people to get into adjudicating how well people pass in terms of their identity, their gender identity. But also offering queer closed spaces or trans and non-binary closed spaces in addition to cisgender closed spaces.
Yeah, and in regards to like the difference between a trans and non-binary closed space and a cis closed space, on a college campus, having a closed space for people who identify as cis is really problematic. I'm just going to throw it out there, super problematic. And this goes back to one of the first conversations that was happening here in the text chat after we were talking about the weather, was about the idea of preferred versus the pronouns I use, and what is it about somebody's preference. And the thing is this is exactly where this comes in. It's about somebody's identity. So if you advertise a space as for people who identify as women, that needs to be kind of an all-comer space. So anyone who self-identifies as a woman, and I just want to make it really, really clear. I know Meg said it, but I want to be very clear that it's for anyone who self-identifies as a woman. And that's very different than saying that this is a space for women only. So as I'm working with students, a lot of times, like our feminist collective, they'll want to do in their advertising as a space for women only. And I have been working with them, like, and challenge them, is it? Would you welcome a trans person a trans woman to your space? And they're always like, yes, we totally would. Great. Then it's for space for people who identify as women.
Another thing we wanted to talk about is then, so if you're working in a mixed gender space, how do you give people the opportunity to talk about the ways that their identity has impacted their experience? And so one way we really like to do that is with spectrum activities. So there are a lot of, over the course of my career and Justin over the course of his, I think we encounter a lot of activities that say, well, okay, split the group up by, guys go over here and girls go over here, and then we'll do a fishbowl or a pair share or something like that. And so with spectrum activities, what we do is we'll say, okay, so if, have you had the experience that you've been told that it's okay to talk with your partner about your expectations for a sexual encounter? If you've been told that's okay, go stand in this corner. If you have not been socialized to do that, go and stand in this corner on the other side of the room, and you can array yourself anywhere in between. And folks can do that. And then what we can do is invite them to notice whether there are really strict spatial divisions by the genders that folks have identified themselves as. Or if that seems to even further divide out, not just by gender, but by race or ethnicity or international versus domestic student or things like that. So it's giving people a chance to layer on aspects of identity that are important to them.
And as a trans person personally, I find that when I'm asked to participate in spectrum activities like that, this is a time that people realize, like, what does it mean to be socialized as a gender that's different than the gender you identify as? So, because of my socialization, I would end up on the side where I was not taught to ask for anything or to say what I wanted sexually, and a lot of that was because of the way I was raised. And obviously that goes across a lot of different intersections of identity, but that's one example that ends up being really gender binary often, and then we can have conversations about where we learn those messages from, because most of that is stuff we learned as a kid.
Another thing that we have talked about is scenarios and how you work scenarios in. And I think a lot of people are doing scenario work, certainly in your educational work. So the first piece that we're working with is proactively adding a really broad range of scenarios. And this speaks to what Jeanette is saying about being aware of how our language implies a hierarchy of cis, binary, straight over queer. So one thing that we do is certainly have scenarios where it's not actually clear that the names are non-gendered or gender inclusive. But another thing that we do is we do put in scenarios that can be read as clearly queer scenarios. And the important thing there is for both queer identified folks to be able to see themselves in the conversation, but also to, I think, engage people in the idea that we can talk about violence across a wide range of identities, that we're not just discussing men's violence against women, we're discussing men's violence against men and the extent to which that overlaps and sometimes doesn't overlap with people's self-identified sexuality, women's violence against women. It opens up a lot of conversations for us. So really proactively adding a broad range of scenarios that can be read as queer and not just gender and sexuality inclusive. And the other piece around this is to push the participants, not to default to, especially in our gender inclusive scenarios, not to default to hetero or cisgender identities, or to notice their own reactions. You want to say a little more about that?
Yeah, so one of the things that we do is that we make all of our names in any of our scenarios are kind of gender neutral names. And as our students are working through different scenarios, they always notice they're like, oh, well, one person in the small group that's working through scenarios would be defaulting to one person's a man and one person's a woman. And somebody else will be like, well, how do you know that? I saw these as different, or I saw, they might still see them as binary identities, but they see somebody as the opposite gender of what somebody else was saying. So we encourage our students then to notice those reactions and then to work from that activity. So what does it mean? And we'll say to them, like, okay, so you are defaulting to making one person a man and one person a woman. Why did you choose to do that? And they'll be like, oh, I don't really know. And then that gets a whole other conversation happening around our implicit bias.
So we've come up to a poll.
Ashley, do you get this one?
Yes. So you should all be able to see the response box. So if you are in a sexual assault preventer or response role, how often do you work with your LGBTQ or multicultural/identity center? So A, I don't work with them at all. B, only when a student I'm supporting identifies as queer. C, once or twice a semester. Or D, we work together regularly. And so it looks like, let me go ahead and, Meg Justin, can you see that? You can see.
Oh, we could.
We could until just moments
Did it
ago.
go away? Here you go. Okay, so it looks like just under half say working together regularly. Okay, so 42%. We have about 20% of folks who are not working at all with those centers.
And so maybe I'm sort of curious for, not every campus has an LGBTQ center. So yeah, I see Cynthia saying we don't have one, Ashley also. And so that's completely, we totally understand that not every campus has a self-defined LGBTQ center.
And shout out to a fabulous organization, which is the Consortium of Higher Education LGBTQ Resource Professionals. If you are in a center, or if you have a center, or if you're looking to start a center, all of those people are welcome to join the consortium. And they're actually working on some stuff right now that's going to be about Title IX and sexual violence and the LGBTQ community, and that will be coming out hopefully within the next year. But they do some phenomenal work and are really great about helping collaboration between different parts of campuses.
And also wanted to shout out as a national resource both the national and state level anti-violence programs.
Yeah.
So the National Center for Anti-Violence Programs and then many states have their own AVPs, which are also a really great resource for looking at different kinds of violence that impacts the LGBTQ community. So
Great.
with that, let us talk about practice.
So in practice, I wanted to mention two really important programs that come out of the Davis Center, which the Davis Center here is deals with identity of all aspects. So it's kind of like the Social Justice and Identity Center. It used to be called the Multicultural Center. It's always included LGBT people in our programming. And two programs that come out of my work are, one is Anything But Straight in Athletics, and the other is Thursday Lunch. Anything But Straight in Athletics is a weekly group for LGBTQ and questioning athletes. And it's a hangout group. And it doesn't really have an agenda most of the time. It's just it's an alternative space for LGBTQ athletes. And we started that group 6 years ago. And it's one of the most successful programs, actually, that I've started in my time here at Williams College. What I'm finding is that the LGBTQ athletes hanging out together and being able to sometimes we watch South Park. We don't even talk about being queer or about being athletes. But giving that space, especially when, for a lot of us, our queer student organizations don't often think about athletes, and our athletic organizations don't often think about queer students. This group ends up being that alternative space, and having a staff member who regularly participates in that also helps a lot, because then those students know where they can get additional support. Those students, I'm finding, are going on to be captains of their teams, which is then also changing some of the climate within the teams, back to what we were talking about earlier with hostile masculinity in athletics, that my students who are participating in this group are also collaborators with us in a lot of our sexual violence prevention work. The other thing that comes out of my office is Thursday Lunch, and it happens one Thursday a month. It used to happen on Wednesday, but this year we changed it to Thursday. We're just going to gay every day. And Thursday lunch, we have a different topic every month that is specific to the LGBTQ community, and it's an intergenerational lunch. And this is one of the only truly intergenerational programs that we have on campus. It also is not just for Williams College, it involves the local community. So we have like queer people in their 60s and 70s who are coming and having lunch with, that are just from the community, have nothing to do with the college. They're sitting down and having lunch with the students. And the topics have varied from everything from marriage to violence within the community. So one of the really most productive conversations we had this year was this, the ad you're seeing right here, which was talking about intrapartner violence and sexual assault in the LGBTQ community. We invited our local domestic violence sexual assault prevention organization to come join us. They talked at the lunch, and then community members were talking about experiences they had as younger queer people or things that they had seen in their friend group. And also we ended up talking about the ways that the conversation around sexual violence within the LGBT community has changed over the years. And it was a really fruitful conversation. But our students are now finding other folks that they can talk to outside of Williams College that can be an extra level of support.
Continuing with practice, we wanted to mention a couple of other key points. So one is involving and supporting staff with queer identities in response work. So we have been fortunate to be able to pull a lot of folks across the community into this work. And one thing, part of this started because, going back 20, 30 years, there were not people doing dedicated anti-violence work on campus. And we just wanted to shout out our colleague Donna, who is on the webinar. But Donna has been at Williams a long time as a health educator and doing significant work. And Donna and some colleagues who have subsequently retired pulled together a really collaborative network of folks over a long, long time. And what that created is a situation where we are able to kind of pull people from campus safety, we're able to pull people from athletics, we're able to pull people from our chaplain's office. And the reason for that was that there was no one dedicated to doing the specific work, but now we have left it, we've deliberately left it as a very cross-community set of work rather than locating everything in a center or trying to build up a lot of staff with very specific specialty expertise on violence prevention, because we feel like we get a lot of great reach. And one of the benefits of that is that staff with queer identities are involved in our 24/7 response system. And we were just chatting the other day about, recruiting more staff into that response network. And one of the challenges we have is broadening diversity. And at the moment, the group of staff doing the 24/7 response work is actually considerably more queer than the campus as a whole, and
or than anywhere else.
So we're needing to actually recruit some more straight identified folks to that. But being able to have staff be able to be public in their identities, I recognize that Massachusetts is having a very particular political moment where we are able to do that, and I totally understand that is not institutionally or community-wise something that's available to folks, but at least being able to support staff with queer identities in the response work.
Another thing to us is about intersections in the curriculum. And so one of the things that's been really exciting, especially over the past couple of years here at Williams, is that we see a lot of our students doing research, papers, films, performances, et cetera, about sexual violence, and especially about sexual violence in the queer community. We're also seeing our students doing internships and activism off campus, both on campus and off campus, especially during their summers, that deals with sexual violence and with sexual violence within the queer community. And both of our offices have been able to really support that work. So our work with faculty members, there's some departments on academic departments on campus, especially women's gender and sexuality studies and Africana studies, who we see a lot more students from those two programs doing a lot of this work, both in the classroom and in internships. both of our offices, the Data Center and then Meg's work through the Dean's office, we have been tying in with those faculty members and with those students to encourage that work. That also includes just showing up. Sometimes we don't think about that very often, but just showing up when a student is doing a thesis presentation and their work was around preventing sexual violence or responding to sexual violence, especially if it's for us, if it's tied to queer identities as well, just showing up to the thesis presentation is really important. The faculty see that kind of thing and are more likely to engage with us in the future. We also tie in with faculty in doing things like film series, et cetera. So we've shown different films on campus that deal with sexual violence, especially things that are about cross-identities. So that might be a film that deals with sexual violence, but that is also talking about race and sexuality. And a lot of those things will tie in with faculty. We'll get faculty to help us advertise the event. I do a film series once a month. I show a film at our local independent movie theater, and I have faculty talking and leading conversation after each film. And some of those films have dealt with sexual violence, and so we've been having a conversation about the intersections of race, gender, sexuality, and sexual violence.
I see two questions that came up in the text chat. So the first, and I'm not taking them as they appear, but first was Jeanette saying that you would like to hear more about what supporting staff with queer identities and response work looks like, because often there are challenges that straight cis students might be uncomfortable receiving assistance from a queer person. Do you have initial thoughts?
So I do have some initial thoughts on that. One is that a lot of times I don't find that to be the case. I've been actually pleasantly surprised, and this kind of goes back to one of those first slides where we were talking about the fluidity of our students. And you know, that slide and that study was actually across a lot of different regions of the country, and a lot of times we think that, like, oh, well, yes, you live in Massachusetts, so of course this is something that's working for you. We haven't really found that totally to be the case. The other thing is that a lot of times you might find that, especially within different religious communities, and we do a lot of work, both of our offices do a lot of work with our chaplain's office and with the faculty members in the religion department. So that has some assistance in that area.
Mm-hmm. And I think also one of the things, so we're thinking about two different things here. One is how to model for the campus, because it's important to the social norms that we're trying to build on campus, that there is a need to have everyone involved in the conversation, that queer folks and not queer folks all have a role to play, and it's not just about intra-identity violence that you are able to talk. And so, you know, I think that there are moments where students sort of, or anyone, non-students too, sort of think for a moment, well, it seems like it might be really important for me to share this piece of my identity with someone. But I think also that, you know, there have been, I'll use your example, you know, there have been straight cis students who've received devastatingly bad responses to their disclosures of violence from straight cis staff people and support people. And I think the same is true, that queer folks who have reached out to other queer folks and received really painful, hurtful responses. And so thinking about wanting to make sure of the competency of people responding just generally is really, really high. So Jeanette saying I've had similar experiences in practice about fear from those making the decisions that response services shouldn't be too queer. So this is probably a moment where this definitely does not reflect the opinions of the federal government or the CDC or CalCASA, but it's, you know, nobody ever cares when everyone who's responding is a straight cis white man. Like, that's never biased, right? It only becomes biased when people who share other identities start moving into response or policy making or decision making roles. So I think just sort of questioning the idea that because people who have identities that are historically marginalized or in positions of response or decision making, that is in some way biased or unacceptable.
And as much as we can in our work, we need, I think, you know, we as staff members need to really be standing with our students and pushing back, and I know this varies depending on your campus and the climate on your campus, but as much as we can be standing with our students and saying, our students aren't encountering life in that way. So our students are encountering life in a very queer world. All of our students right now, our traditional college-age students, they're post-Ellen. So they're post-Ellen coming out. For a lot of us, some of our formative moments were Ellen coming out on national TV. These kids have been raised, I call it the post-Ellen time. These are the young people who were raised with Glee and other shows that showed a variety of identities and ways that people interact with those identities. And our staff, on the end of staff and faculty, we haven't totally caught up to our students. So as much as we can support the things we hear our students saying and using the research that is starting to come out, there's more and more research every day coming out about the fluidity of our students' identities in regards to sexuality and gender, and as much as we can do to support that and show that qualitative and quantitative research is important.
The last piece around practice that I just want to make sure we get to is relationships with community-based agencies, and I think that this is especially important for campuses that themselves are perhaps do not have a ton of services or a ton of opportunities for collaboration right within the campus, whether that's because they're not yet existing, because they're really strapped in supporting folks on campus, but looking to community-based agencies. So one of the key relationships is with your Rape Crisis Center, and this is, now you see my bias showing through as coming from a Rape Crisis Center specifically, but relationships with your Rape Crisis Center or dual agency or domestic violence agency. Our local organization is a dual DV sexual assault agency, so we are on their LGBTQ project advisory board. We invite them regularly to participate in Thursday lunch, and it's really helped a lot, especially in sort of puncturing students' unwillingness to seek resources from within the community. Students are often very comfortable, because everything on campus is very close and very easily located. They're often hesitant to go off campus, so that's really helped in the relationship building. And also with LGBTQ community groups, so whether those are organizations who provide queer health services, as we said, the state anti-violence programs. I see Ashley in the text chat, Ashley Schulte has shared Forge's link to serving trans survivors. Forge is absolutely incredible. That webinar was fabulous, but Forge provides a lot of really incredible resources on serving trans survivors and trans folks in general.
And with the LGBTQ community groups, one of the things that I found just in regards to LGBTQ work is getting my students off campus. So, and that has to be from my own example. So, Meg and I are both really involved in things that are happening outside of Williams College, and our color here is purple, and so purple and gold, and so we call this the purple bubble. And every school pretty much, says that they have some kind of bubble that they live in. And how do you burst that bubble? And we burst that bubble by participating in things off campus, but also we burst that bubble in inviting folks from off campus onto campus. So we don't invite, off campus people to all of our programming. So like the QSU, our queer student group, they don't invite off campus people to that group. That's specifically for Williams students. But if I do a public event and I invite a speaker, for example, that's in one of our more public buildings, I advertise to the LGBTQ community group. I also advertise to all the people I know on Facebook and try to get more general community members to those events. And it's, again, just increasing that support network for our students so that they see greater support across ages, races, classes, et cetera.
So we would love to hear what collaborations you've been a part of that have supported and enriched your work.
Yes, so if you would let us know in the text chat what collaborations you all have been a part of, either on your campus or if you're from a community organization, what collaborations in the community you've been a part of. We would love to hear from you. And, I think back to when I was on the campus getting my undergrad, and a lot of the programming around sexual violence and prevention was coming out of the Women's Resource Center. and the LGBTQ Student Center was on the opposite side of campus. And so even just the way that those two offices were set up, it didn't lend itself well to collaborating. There would have to be some effort on the part of folks to do that. And so, it sounds like a lot of people have some great collaborations, which is wonderful. Yeah, it's great. So I'm just reading, Sarah said a community task force with other local agencies and campus pride clubs, campus gender studies clubs, a sexual violence coalition that includes campus and community offices, and the campus LGBTQIA office, John said. So it looks like there's so many great collaborations.
So I see that Susan mentioned a collaboration between the queer student group and the Black student group, and I just really want to highlight that is so important. And the topic of for today, our topic is specifically about LGBTQ people, but we always have to really remember and center, especially queer women of color in our work. And from a Black feminism perspective, that if we center Black queer women in our work, that we're actually addressing so many different identities, and by addressing and focusing on one of the a cross-section of identities, that becomes one of the most marginalized groups, that we then are actually addressing almost everyone. And a lot of times we don't think about, or we don't discuss openly, the intersections of race and sexuality, race and gender, and then all of those identities and sexual violence. And we really have to always keep that at the forefront of our mind in the work that we do, and encourage our students to not just be single identity focused as well.
That's a great point, Justin. Thank you.
So what are the next steps that we can take? Both of us are huge advocates of picking the low-hanging fruit first. And that can sometimes be an emotional challenge, because there is such significant work to be done. I think Justin mentioned earlier on, everything that, shout out to our North Carolina colleagues and your fight of Mississippi. But, until last Thursday, Massachusetts was also a state that did not have public accommodations protections.
And still the governor hasn't signed it yet.
Yeah.
So, people think that issues around bathrooms for trans folk are just happening in North Carolina and places in the South, but here for the state of Massachusetts, public accommodations, which includes bathrooms, access to hotels, access to restrooms, trans people have not been included in the protected class in regards to public accommodations. And our state Senate just passed that last Thursday, and we're still waiting to see if our Republican governor is going to sign it or not. He threatened to veto it, and then he's kind of changed his mind. But we really have to keep in mind that even in liberal Massachusetts, that we share some of those same struggles.
So with that in mind, it can be tempting to kind of run at the mountain and try to get up it on the first chance. And I think that many of us have had the experience of that feeling so important and feeling like the thing that needs our most attention. But that it's okay, especially if relationships are new or if they are requiring repair, to do relationship building and pick the low-hanging fruit first. Showing up as a coalition partner, Justin talked a little bit about this, is just sort of being present for colleagues in their programming or for our community organizations, and really getting an understanding. That has helped me so much, get an understanding of shared challenges and ways that we can approach, even at a policy level, all of our challenges. So, I actually think do you want to talk a little bit about the preferred name?
Yeah.
Or serving both international students and trans students?
So I wanted to mention two things. So one is that by picking the low-hanging fruit first, our students are only here for an average of 5 years. And they need to see, they're asking for really big things. And often they're asking for things that we know as staff are like, oh my word, to be able to do that, we have to get the trustees to sign off of it. They only meet once a year. We have to meet with all these the faculty have to vote on it. But the big issues, we need to continue to address those big issues. But if we can help our students find some of those smaller things to pick off, like relationship building, like them seeing that there's more programming happening, or that there's collaborative programming happening with faculty. We had an awesome example last year, which our pro-life group on campus invited this pro-life feminist to campus. And it was interesting at best. And it was a challenge for our pro-choice students and a lot of the campus. And this woman mentioned that one of the things she talked about is how campuses often are not supportive of students who have children. And she talked about how, she's like, well, look around in your bathrooms. Do you have changing tables in the bathrooms? And so I worked with our students, because we didn't. So I worked with the students from both the pro-life group and from our feminist collective. They both wrote letters, separate letters, but they both wrote letters to the administration about, can we get some changing tables, at least in what are considered our public spaces. And this was low-hanging fruit.
In all
across
bathrooms,
campus.
Not just women's bathrooms,
right.
In all the bathrooms.
So in the bathrooms with the little skirts, in the bathrooms with the little pants, in the bathrooms that don't have little skirts or little pants on the door. And so it was low-hanging fruit, and we had a lot of support across campus. I collected some stories from male-identified faculty members who had found it really a challenge to change their kids when their kids were on campus. And we got changing tables in our restrooms. It was simple. And the students, they were like, wow, we did something. We did something together with people that don't agree on things. And now those are some of the students that participate in that action are some of our students who are most involved in the groups that Meg and I run, which is a really exciting thing.
Another piece is around capacity building and starting really close to home with that. So asking, where can I build skills? Where are some of the things that I need to build competency with? So, whether that's around your pronoun use, and I know a lot of folks struggle with singular they pronouns or ze-zir, or remembering to ask at the start of meetings what folks' pronoun use is. That, figuring out how to do that is really critically important. And one of the examples that we can look at, and I'll type it into the text chat here. Do you want to talk about that?
So we have a website that's lgbt.williams.edu, and if you go to that website, there's a whole section for about trans people on campus, and that includes, it's kind of a one-stop shop for a lot of our policy work, but it also includes a whole section about pronouns that has links to some resources. Last year we did, I worked with some students to create a little handout that went in every inbox on campus. So that was every student, every staff, every faculty member got a little handout about pronouns. And it talks about why it's important to ask people's pronouns, why it's important to respect people's pronouns, and then also gave resources to really address, like the English professor who doesn't want to use a singular they. And so it talks about, like, well, actually, there's a lot of history of the singular they. Shakespeare used the singular they. So it addressed a lot of questions right off the bat and gave some ideas of how people can ask people's pronouns without feeling, ideally without feeling awkward, or incorporate into the beginning of their class and stuff like that.
So we have a question about what resources do you have in regards to sexual assault and domestic violence in the LGBTQ community? That's a great question. So one of the things that we do is, and I'll relate this to building capacities and others. So one of the ways that we do this is doing specific training with any student affairs staff who are in any kind of response role. So that's not just our health center, but it's also our student life office, it's in our athletics program, and it's talking specifically about intra-community violence, so violence that's happening in peer-to-peer relationships in queer communities, and helping folks understand a little bit about what some of the barriers to resource seeking are in terms of people, the possibility that people will lose their queer community on campus, the possibility that particularly in this climate where there's a lot of conversation about whether trans people or whether queer people are dangerous to other folks, a lot of students' hesitation to sort of expose their community to further harm by reporting violence. So we talk extensively about that. We also make sure that all of our printed resources, as I said, have examples that are the individual, the student. We're not gendering that people who are harmed are women, people who do the harm are men. And also putting in our Gender and Sexuality Resource Center, in spaces that queer students spend time, putting sexual assault and domestic violence resources visibly in those spaces, and putting in our student health spaces or in our response spaces visible resources around queer life on campus to bridge those connections.
A few years ago, we came up with a large poster that a lot of us put around campus. It was very large. It was maybe too big, but we put up around campus, and that had a list of resources that you could contact if you had experienced sexual violence or interpartner violence. And those resources, we made sure that those resources included my role in the Gender and Sexuality Resource Center, which is a project of the Davis Center. We made sure that it mentioned things about gender identity and about queer students.
And I see there are questions coming in fast, which is great, and we'll get to those. The last thing I want to say on the capacity building that I think is really important is this is relating to what we were saying below around materials, like adding or changing scenarios. Add or change scenarios if you feel that your facilitators are prepared to facilitate that in a pro-social way. And so I say that because many of us are using peer educators, and so making sure that your facilitators are prepared to kind of address queer-phobic comments that might come up, or heterosexist or cis-sexist comments that might come up in the unpacking of those scenarios. So with that, just wanted to move forward. Nope, just kidding. Ignore that text chat question. We wanted to answer some of the questions. So Nikki asked a question about asking, what do you say about being inclusive and not using terms that others believe are good manners? So it just, our campus culture, and I totally understand that this is not others' campus culture, is that many, many people go either by their first names, or we have actually really so like most professors are referred to as Professor so-and-so or Dr. so-and-so. Deans are often referred to as Dean last name or Dean first name. And by and large, most other staff are going by their first name, but I think that that's a piece around asking people's pronoun usage, and especially if it's a campus culture where you know, people often say Mr. Adkins or Ms. Basong, asking people, what are your pronouns, or what title do you use, you know, and giving people the chance to tell you that.
And this is also a place where a lot of your queer resource centers and LGBT resource centers are probably really trying to change campus culture to get away from Mr. and Ms. And Mix, thank you, Marianne, for mentioning Mix, MX, which is a fabulous title option. But a lot of people don't realize that that is an option, and your queer resource center might be actually trying to either get that as a more well-known option, or also to just look at referring to people by their first name, or like Dean so-and-so. And you know, queer resource centers are always looking for other folks on campus to help them out with that work. And so talking to them about what are they doing and how can you assist would be a great thing to do. Jennifer mentioned about helping a parent that is struggling with their child's gender identity. And Jennifer, I'm really glad you mentioned that. One of the things that's interesting to me on campus is that as people know that I'm very out as a trans man, I've had a lot of staff and faculty members come up to me and tell me that no one knows but that their kid is trans as well. And they've actually been looking for a lot of assistance on that. I think it's also an opportunity to mention that, you know, when we talk about working in coalition with off-campus partners, one of the partners that I work most closely with is our local high school and elementary schools. And I do various age-appropriate work with especially the health classes at the junior high and high school level around LGBT identities. And then I've been ending up connecting those folks, people through the schools, with other community members, especially folks who like therapists who focus on gender identity and stuff like that. So I've kind of, personally, I've ended up, it's partly the way I roll in general, but I've ended up being a connection for on and off campus partners with local service providers.
Hugh was asking a question, what successful programs are there that focus particularly on engaging male-identified students in violence prevention? So I can talk a little bit about some of our programs on campus and then kind of more generally. So we do have a group, Men for Consent, that has really similar, so folks are familiar with campus Men of Strength clubs that Men Can Stop Rape supports. Men for Consent has really similar approaches, and I think one of the things that is really excellent that's happened, it started initially really narrowly focused on sort of men for consent, and they have since broadened out with Justin's really helpful guidance to talking about masculinity issues more generally, and so engaging this idea that actually everyone on campus, it's not just potential cis female victims of violence who are harmed by toxic masculinity, that everyone is harmed by toxic masculinity. And so they hosted a really great event called Oktoberfest back in the fall, where it was sort of an Oktoberfest food-themed event, but it was an opportunity for everyone to come and talk about kind of masculinity, and they're preparing to engage with a lot of our men's athletic teams around exploring issues related to masculinity and athletics. We also have our Student Athlete Advisory Council had an athlete-driven initiative against sexual assault that was looking, because those are sort of by, certainly there are trans athletes, and Justin has worked really hard to include trans athletes on teams, but those are, because of the nature of the NCAA, those are really sort of gender-separated spaces, and so that group looking at ways to engage closed spaces. This is my personal analysis of engaging male-identified folks in violence prevention. I think for the purposes of addressing our shared risk factors, I think it's very important to approach it as a human rights, civil rights issue, that people should be, and male-identified people should be engaged in violence prevention, because all of us are harmed when violence happens, and it diminishes the safety of our whole community. And different people do experience that impact in different ways, but that when we sort of approach it as, you know, men need to protect women, that in some ways is inflaming some of those risk factors around strict binaries. When we're valuing women only as the sisters or spouses or children of men, that is devaluing women who are not identified, or people who are not identified in that way. So it's my feeling that folks who kind of engage masculinity really broadly and engage it as a broad human rights issue, I find that to be the most compelling approach to that.
We had a really fabulous conversation where we invited faculty and staff men to join in with our Men for Consent student group in a conversation about how they learned masculinity. How did they learn to be a man, or what a man looked like? And we started off by having some staff and faculty members speak about their experiences growing up, and we had some people talk about class issues, about sexual orientation, about race, and about how those other identities influence what they learned about being a man. And then we got together in smaller conversations around tables where we had staff and faculty men at tables with interspersed with students, and how it was some of the best conversations that I've ever been a part of, where we were talking about these intersections of identity and masculinity. And you know, one of the coolest things I'll just share with you is that we had this great conversation about how a lower income white cis guy who's a faculty member talked about all the things he learned about masculinity, and then he became a faculty member, and how his family of origin saw him as less masculine because he works in higher education, and what that did to him and his understanding of his own personal masculinity. And then now that he's raising kids, how that has changed the way and influenced the way he raises his children. So some areas where you wouldn't automatically think, oh, that's something that deals with masculinity, we were able to explore those ideas.
And so Stephanie in the text chat leads into our last text chat question, What next steps will you take in making your prevention efforts more inclusive to LGBTQ students?
Great. So we would love to hear from you. And I mean, this conversation has been so wonderful, Justin and Meg. Thank you so much. I feel like we could go on for another hour and a half because there's just so much here. So while we let folks answer that, there is a lot of discussion happening in the text chat about resources, and so I just wanted to direct you all to a new report that Prevent Connect Campus released last week, actually on Friday. That is a national scan of sexual assault prevention on U.S. college campuses, and it is available at the link that I am putting in the box for download. And there's a lot of links and a lot of information around kind of, echoing what Justin, you and Meg have been saying about you can't focus on one identity or you can't focus on one conversation when it comes to sexual violence. We really have to look at this issue in a comprehensive way in order to, address all of these different risk factors, but also address everyone's different identities and where people are coming from. So that's a great resource. But just looking, we have folks saying that Ashley Johnson, oh, great spelling, Ashley, setting up trainings with the local schools to educate about violence in the LGBT community, marketing and collaborative efforts in language and programming. There's some more resources that are being put in the text chat also from folks. So it looks like, there's some really wonderful plans in place that people have. Meg, Justin, do you have any closing thoughts on what you're seeing?
I think just to, to say that we work together a ton, and I know that I don't speak for myself just in saying that it's enriched really both of our work tremendously, but that it's a collaboration that grew up over a really long time. And that it wasn't, some of the best collaborations are not always the most easy at first. And so to keep plugging away at it and keep, knowing that it's something that students really appreciate, and I think it's incredibly powerful for them to see such strong relationships. And just to say that it is something that gets built over time, but it's really significant, I think, when we see that change happening on campus.
Yeah. Well, thank you. So we are just about out of time, but thank you all for the wonderful discussion, and we hope that you'll join us in June for affirmative consent policies, cultural barriers, and the need for affirmative sexuality, and watch for more topics to be announced. Again, if you haven't connected with us online yet, please do so. We would love to hear from you. Thanks again, Meg and Justin, for your facilitation and presentation. This is a really great topic. It seems like it resonated with a lot of our audience, so thank you. And thank you all for joining us. Have a wonderful rest of your Tuesday.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Have a great afternoon. Stay warm, which is weird to say in mid-May for those where it's chilly and rainy.
True. All right, I will go ahead and I'm going to close the phone line. We'll leave the text chat open for a few more minutes if folks want to share more resources.